When we indoctrinate our children, whether that's at a public school or at a church or at our own homes, we steal their ability to think critically. And that can have catastrophic um, consequences, even if what you are teaching them isn't exactly wrong. Okay? It's still taking the ability to critically analyze a situation or whatever away from them. And that can prevent them from being able to think critically later in life. There's a lot of consequences about this. And a lot of times people put the blame on one group. Oh, it's those whoever teachers, they're indoctrinating our children. Or, oh, it's that church group, it's indoctrinating our children. Or it's this political group, it's indoctrinating our children. But it's happening in our homes too. And parents, if we're not careful, we will end up doing that to our own children. I see it happen all the time. My dad always taught us to think critically and to question things. He taught us to evaluate our teachers as much as they evaluate us. And this kind of idea that you should question things, you should ask questions, not necessarily be argumentative, not have a problem with authority, but try to understand and make sure that what you are hearing is actually accurate, because sometimes it's not, or sometimes we don't understand it properly. And if we aren't encouraged to question, then we will blindly listen to whatever. And when we are prepared to only be spoon-fed information, that leaves us open later in life to become pawns in somebody else's war, or flying monkeys to some wicked witch, because we can't think for ourselves. And that starts at home. It starts with the parents, because we have to take some responsibility for our own children's upbringing. So that was one thing my dad taught me, was to, think critically. And when I had a question, it wasn't scoffed at, it wasn't disregarded. So indoctrination isn't always a malicious thing. I would say most of the time it's not. People just expect their voices to be heard and to be believed. And if you don't, then it is an assault on them. And this is so problematic on so many levels, because especially when it comes to religion, especially because then the person, whether they be an adult or a child who's being spoon-fed whatever information, because they won't be allowed to question, they'll actually, and oftentimes it's unconscious, I would say most of the time, elevate that person to a point that they're actually between them and God. And the person who is being elevated may or may not be aware of what's happening. But it is the responsibility of the teacher to recognize that they have more knowledge, whatever it is, than the person that they are communicating with, whether it be your own child or someone else's child if you're a teacher, or somebody that if you're a pastor, somebody in your church or in your synagogue or in your temple, wherever. And it's our responsibility to recognize that role, if elevated, has a lot of power in it. So if we as educators, whatever kind of educator you are, we all learn from each other. If we who have the knowledge, that people are coming to us for knowledge, if we don't allow ourselves to be questioned, then that creates this relationship where they're not allowed to question, or there will be a consequence. And so you can check if something is indoctrination by watching to see what happens when a question is posed. Not just any question, because sometimes people, they know what indoctrination looks like and they don't want to be like that, So they do this other thing, even if they don't realize that they're actually still indoctrinating. Okay, it's still the same thing. So sometimes they'll ask you a question, and a leading question, because they don't actually want you to question. They just want you to feel like you're questioning or ask your opinion, but they already had the answer in their mind, what they wanted, so they prepped the situation so that it would go there. It's like leading the witness, right, in court. It's not actually them at that point. So that's also indoctrination, even though there is questioning, because it's not really critical. And you can test this, because when you ask a question that is difficult, a question that can be uncomfortable, a question that maybe knocks them down a little bit. I'm not saying we should intentionally do that, but when it comes up, it will come up. If they respond with any number of different responses, but the end result being that you will be punished in some form for questioning, or it'll be frowned upon or discouraged or whatever, or they'll paint you as somebody just wanting to, whatever it is, that's indoctrination. You should really be aware of that. And they may not be aware that they're doing it, so you don't have to hate them or anything. Like my father would tell us, he would also tell us to take the truth out of the situation, because oftentimes people are right in part, and we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we can still glean some information out of any situation if we know how to think critically. This is why it's so important, because once our children learn how to think critically and question, they are going to be able to learn anything. And that's really what we want, right? As parents, when they are spoon-fed, it sets the stage for them to continue in those relationships as adults. So they will end up in relationships where there's this hierarchy, or they won't be prepared or understand what's happening. Now, I'm not saying that it's always wrong to spoon feed. Everyone needs milk at some point, right? And we need to start to learn. The same is true for little children when we have to teach them how to tie their shoes. There are things that we do need to tell them how to do this, or the very basics. But even then, asking a question should be permitted, or at least in my opinion, and encouraged, because then you can understand what they're not understanding. So when we discourage that question, then it prevents them from doing that later in life, and they have to learn how to do that later. And that's harder. It's easier to learn these things when we're little, and to thwart that indoctrination and the repetition and all of the other things that go with indoctrination. So I was really considering that with my children's faith, and I was so grateful to my father for never forcing anything on us, but instead he never did. Unfortunately, other people did, but I'm grateful for him and my mother for that. And because of that, I know I believe in the Lord, not because someone forced it on me, not because someone told me you have to believe this or you're bad, but because I saw the truth in it through critical analysis. And that's a long story, but it's my story. And I'm convicted because I wasn't indoctrinated. When you're indoctrinated and then you find out that this little bit is wrong that you learned, or that you understood it wrong because so-and-so taught it wrong, because they didn't know, because we're all human, right? Then there's a likelihood of throwing the whole thing out, or just disregarding whatever new understanding you have, because you can't think critically. So there's no correcting you at that point. And there's no growth. There's no movement closer to the Lord, because, at least when it comes to religion and your faith, because you can't let go of the idol that you've created. You've elevated this knowledge to the level of an idol at that point, because you're not able to see anything else, and it is the gospel truth. So thinking critically is really important, and I know that I don't always do the greatest job, because, no parent does. it perfect. But if I can instill this in them, then I know that they will be able to learn even if I failed them in one area, right? They're still going to be able to get it because they're going to be able to learn for themselves. And it'll glorify the Lord because they'll be able to speak with confidence about their faith and about what it means to them. They'll be able to share their own testimony because it's not going to be just them regurgitating my testimony, but their own testimony of what God did for them and what He revealed to them through His Word and through His Spirit. Right? It's such an empowering thing that we can offer our children, and it's so easy to take that away through indoctrination. So I just hope that helps someone out there to understand just how influential we are, whether it's our children or anyone, actually. I've been greatly influenced by strangers at the park when I was little. Our influence, our responsibility is so profound, especially to the children. And God made us to be free. He came to set us free. And why would we enslave our children? That's it. Thanks for listening, and until next time.